Have you ever had a teacher that played a major influence in your life? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name is Ted Meissner. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. And today we're going to be talking about bringing mindfulness into school systems and the unique circumstances each one of those may have. Remember to subscribe when you get a chance. And thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. Our guest today is Ben Painter. Ben, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah. Hey, Ted. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very glad to. And this is a conversation I've been very eager for because the stuff we're going to be talking about, mindfulness in education, is happening a lot more lately, and there's a lot to it. But before we dive into that, I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit about your background, maybe what brought you to mindfulness and what it is you're doing with it now.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Let's see. First introduction to mindfulness that I had was in middle school. I had a family member who was going through some fairly severe mental health crisis, and Zen Buddhism, contemplative practice, mindfulness was part of his healing. It wasn't the silver bullet that fixed everything. He's doing great now, but it was part of his healing along with other stuff. And my first introduction to mindfulness was sitting down with him on the carpet of my parents, where my family grew up, in the basement, and we watched a Zen talk on YouTube. And yeah, it was one of these moments where I think when someone's kind of going through a hard time in life, there's a little bit of like a sacredness or an importance to it. And yeah, it planted a strong seed that this stuff was powerful and could really be helpful for me. And then I went to high school at a school called Middlesex School, which is a prep school in Concord, Massachusetts. And they had a really amazing, unique model of introducing mindfulness to their students, where they had a director of mindfulness, this guy, Doug Worthen, whose job, it was kind of like the program was getting going while I was there. So the program looked really different my freshman year versus my senior year versus 5 years after I graduated. But the gist was Doug Worthen's role was to skillfully integrate mindfulness offerings to the students, faculty, staff, parents, caregivers of that community. And that was my introduction to it, was in a classroom, actually, under the awesome mentorship and leadership of Doug Worthen.
Yeah. And how did that lead to where you are now with whole school mindfulness?
Well, so first, I think I was open to mindfulness, and but really I just liked this guy, Doug. He just kind of checked a lot of boxes for me. He was a graduate of my high school and athletic hall of fame, and so kind of had like these like chops. uh and then he kind of like embodied this really sweet, vibrant masculinity, where he was so kind but also masculine. And so I think for me at that age, he quickly became kind of a role model. So whatever Doug was offering, I would have taken. That Before I liked mindfulness practice, I liked Doug. And then I started to take these mindfulness classes and really started to appreciate the practice. And I think you were mentioning like you got into Zen because of a hard time focusing with concentration. I resonate with that. I had a fairly major concussion from football in high school, and Middlesex is a intense academic environment, and I was having a hard time focusing. So it was intuitive to me at that moment to practice cultivating and supporting, kind of having slightly more autonomy over my attention through contemplative practice could support me academically. So I kind of got into it for performancy reasons, but then I stayed with the practice for totally different reasons, mostly related to community. So I stayed with the practice for community reasons, and I really just loved the environments and kind of what happens when a community comes around, and mindfulness exploration of what it means to be human, cultivating kind of positive qualities like compassion, what happens to the people in that group and what it brings out in people and what people try on in that space. And so after high school, me and my best friend took a gap year before going to college. And we did a few different things in that gap year, but one of the things was we went to Nepal for 3 months and got to practice with some pretty amazing monastics who have really dedicated their lives to the practice. And that was just like another fully kind of buying in moment, seeing this one guy in particular, Lama Sherab, who was in his mid 30s and had already done 10 years of dedicated retreat. So this guy was very sincerely dedicated, and just kind of like love was flowing out of his pores. It felt like it was just such a magnetic person. And so really kind of reaffirmed this idea that had been growing in me, that we can cultivate qualities in our mind that lead to really being an amazing person that supports the people around them and leads to less suffering. And got into Doug's wife was the executive director of Inward Bound Mindfulness Education at that time, now called Inward Bound Mindfulness, but back then I knew it as IB.me.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
started going on those retreats as kind of like a teen late adult, teen early adult. And again, the retreat environment where there's a bunch of people going all in on it, just the community that gets formed on those retreats is so special. And so I interned with Inward Bound Mindfulness Education when I was in college, and it was down the street from Doug and the high school I went to. So, we'd have extended lunch breaks where we'd go hang out with Doug during this internship and practice and hang out. And we just kind of got to talking about the success of the program at Middlesex. And there was a successful pilot scaling that was happening at a school out in Texas called St. Andrew's School, where a funder approached Doug and said, "Hey, I really love what you're doing here. I'd love to see if we can replicate it." It's the Evolve Foundation, Bo Shao. And so the puzzle pieces came together where there's this funder, and Doug knew of this amazing teacher, Adam Ortman, who was connected to the school community because his spouse was an employee there. And the puzzle pieces came together where there's a funder, there's a great teacher, there's a school who's open to it. And essentially, they catalyzed this school building a similar program. And when I say similar, I mean that there was someone with a deep practice embodied who wanted to be teaching this, who had the dedicated time and space to be able to thoughtfully build a program for that community. It wasn't the same program as what happened at Middlesex, but it made sense for that community. And Doug was really supportive of him in the early years as a thought partner and getting that off the ground. So that was there. And we said, hey, what if we could start an organization to try to spread this model at a time, when mindfulness in schools seemed and seems even now more just like such a essential 21st century skill that we wanted to promote.
Yeah, there's so much there. You mentioned IBME, and I think Jessica Maury was one of the one of the guests on one of the previous podcasts
Oh,
here,
cool.
and how this was growing and finding a unique spot that it's a different program that was developed than yours at Middlesex and what they had in Texas because it's a different environment.
Yeah.
And that the understanding and appreciation of those unique circumstances is often missed. That we'll try to just bring in a particular program and as a lift and drop and put it in exactly as
Oh,
it is.
totally.
That tends
Yeah.
not to work so well. So having
Yeah.
those unique people who are there and part of that community, of that cultural setting is so important to the success of programs like that.
Yeah. And that's kind of become a core part of the DNA of what we do at Whole School. And maybe this is a nice segue where I could just explain a little bit about what we do. So there are a bunch of ways to bring mindfulness into schools, and there are amazing organizations in this space trying a bunch of different models, from tech-based solutions to outside provider models to curricula that are scaling. We are less of a program that we have fully built, and we are, like you said, kind of drag and dropping into more schools. And we're more like an accelerator where we find where there's a teacher or a guidance counselor, administrator, someone who's already in a school system who loves mindfulness and it's helped them and they embody it. And they're kind of doing it off the side of their desk. And that's happening in schools all over the country because of the situation that we're in right now with the mental health crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And I would be fun to maybe talk about the kind of whys of this moment for both of us. And so we partner with them and their school leaders to have that mindfulness program go from an off the desk thing to a deeper, more integrated, accelerated, more impactful program. And we do that by we will give a grant to the school so that they can carve out a dedicated portion of that person's paid time for a couple years to say, hey, you've got X amount of hours a week now to focus on building out a program. So that kind of dedicated paid time is a pretty key ingredient. And then the second way we support it is just a full wraparound supportive 2-year experience for that. We call these people mindfulness directors. So it's a 2-year cohort experience that's pretty all out. And there's a lot of components to it, but the main ones are a community of other people doing this work to talk shop with and to build community with and to get support from, because so often it's like these kind of solo mindfulness entrepreneurs that are just kind of like feeling alone in a system. So just to have that camaraderie and that idea sharing is big. 2, it's that kind of outside legitimization factor of another organization coming in and kind of introducing this mental model of this as a role that, you know, deserves respect and time. 3 is, and this is kind of an evolving project, but support around setting goals and getting aligned with your school leader on, hey, here's where our mindfulness program is at right now. Where do we want it to be in 2 years? And what would we need to see? And what does success look like? And writing that all down and getting everybody on the same page. And that can like really help catalyze some development. And so that's what we do. We're trying to create these shining proof points of mindfulness done really well in a representative sample size of schools that are different from each other. And the other thing I would say is over the last, I've been at Whole School now for 6 years. Over the last 6 years, there's also been kind of an increasing focus on kind of the intersection of mindfulness and social justice. GEM is an acronym that we use a lot at Whole School, which is justice, education, and mindfulness. And what I'll say about that is I think mindfulness has a really high potential. Hello, listeners. This is my cat, Papa. To support efforts in school communities to have the educational experience really support belonging, equity, inclusion. And it also can be used in a way that's totally not in that direction. Like you can introduce mindfulness to a school in a flavor that says, hey, this is a tool for getting all the kids to shut up and be still, and kind of pushing us further down that path of schools being really kind of punitive places, training people to be factory workers, especially for Black and brown folks. And rather than a kind of an amazing tool to help understand your mind and your own human experience and cultivate well-being and cultivate harmony of the community, you know, it can be used in that way, and has been used in that way. And so that's another thing that we support in the mindfulness directors.
There's so many layers to this, Ben, and especially around the uniqueness of each place. It's not here's the one curriculum and just go to town with it. It's like, no, it's firmly embedding this in a system
Yeah.
and understanding it is an ecosystem. There are a lot of moving parts with that, and having that comprehensive understanding of what it is we want to accomplish and how we want to support the kids, but everyone who's in the constellation of their social framework, and how does that show up, or does it show up with engagement in real world problems? And we
Mhm.
are seeing more of that. You're exactly right. And not just in schools, but in other contexts of how mindfulness can help with addressing some of the challenges that are faced in the world today. So that's terrific. And I'm curious about some of the past, I think you said 6 years. What are some of the hurdles that you've encountered and some of the difficulties you've run into, and how did you work with those?
Just in getting whole school off the ground. Yeah. I mean, first I want to shout out our funders and just say thank you for, I think, philanthropy in this for us has allowed us to help innovate. Like, I think this isn't something that public dollars would naturally flow to at the beginning. And so philanthropy is kind of acting as that bridge capital so that we can imagine something better and put out some tests and see what works. And I'll also say a challenge has been when I got into this 6 years ago, and then COVID, students being on their phones 7 hours a day, consuming short form content, and we're seeing all the repercussions of that. I would have thought that the big philanthropies would be taking massive bets on mindfulness in schools, whether it's our organization or some other organization. Um, and that hasn't been happening really. Yeah. So that's been a challenge. And let's see, another challenge. Another challenge was COVID. We really got going in the context of COVID, and that had kind of a push pull effect on our organization. On one hand, schools became more willing to innovate to meet the broad range of needs that were new or really heightened as a result of COVID. And so sometimes that unlocked mental models and unlocked funding and, made things easier. And at the same time, it made getting a new innovative program going in some schools way more difficult. And then there was this thing called the Esser Cliff. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. There was a bunch of federal money that became available as part of the Esser relief funds, which is attached to COVID, that allowed there to be some financial spaciousness for schools who, successfully worked the system to get that money. That was allowed, more spaciousness to do mindfulness. That then there was this thing called the Esser Cliff, where that funding ran out. And so schools across the country were making tough decisions around what goes, what's cut now. And, education and social emotional learning is becoming a politicized thing. And so that can be a challenge as well.
Yeah. So for those who might be a little uncertain about the role of mindfulness in schools, or may have some just lack of understanding about it, what are some things you might recommend to them, or or what might you offer as something for them to chew on a little bit?
Mm. I think I would ask them the question, given the unique opportunities and challenges of this moment, and all that this moment has with it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what's the point of school? Yeah. What should be the point of school? And in my opinion, in an era where polarization is a theme and young people's attention with a new level of sophistication unseen by any prior generation young people's attention is under attack. And, phones are really, and the apps and social media are really good at grabbing and holding attention. And we've got AI. And more and more career paths potentially being changed, and more, in my opinion, reason to invest in our humanity. I believe that mindfulness should be elevated at this moment to kind of meet the demands of 2025. And particularly the ability to cultivate some stability and autonomy over your own attention as a 21st century skill, I would hope could be something that we all can agree on. And I'm a big fan of the phone-free schools movement and work of folks like Jonathan Haidt. And when they get out of school and the bell rings, those distractions are still there. And so some proactive skill building there seems important.
Yeah.
And I would also say, our future leaders of our country are sitting in a classroom right now. And what are the kind of more heart qualities that we want to support in them? And seeing our leadership right now, I would love us to move in the direction of kind of compassion, empathy, the ability to communicate clearly and honestly, those being things that we would want to nurture. And I think mindfulness is a great foundation for all of those things.
Yeah. Not surprisingly, I agree with all of that. I'm wondering, Ben, while we've got you, what else would you like to talk about? Because there's a lot here, and I'm sure we could talk for hours, but is there anything else that's coming to mind that you'd like to explore a little bit?
One thing is that in the next couple of weeks, we're going to put our next call out for applications. And so if you are in a school or know of someone in a school who's passionate about mindfulness, and we're taking some strategic shifts. So if you're in Massachusetts, New York, Virginia, Washington, D.C., or California, so if you're any of those places, and you're in a school or know someone who's in a school who's into mindfulness, go to our website in a couple of weeks, because we would love to partner with you to help take your mindfulness program to the next level. And if you are someone who is philanthropically inclined and wants to support the movement to create these shining proof points of mindfulness done really well, we would love your support. Yeah, that's kind of my PSA. Shameful
Yeah.
plugs.
Yeah.
Shameless
And
plugs.
for those who are watching or listening to this, that website is www.wholeschoolmindfulness.org. And of course, I'm going to have that and several other links in the description for this episode. Ben, anything else you want to just say with some just parting words for the people who are watching above and beyond that?
The one other idea maybe I'll slip in here is that there's a difference between teaching students mindfulness and teaching mindfully. And investing in the well-being and mindfulness of educators might be an essential ingredient, or maybe even the most important way to support students' mindfulness, because the adults in a school building really kind of create the weather. And so if students, even if they're not learning the techniques, are surrounded by embodied, stable, equanimous adults, and the school is kind of a place where mindfulness is just a way of doing things around here, I think that's really amazing. So I think I'm a big fan of teaching young people techniques as is clear by the rest of what I've said. But I also think teaching the adults or supporting adult mindfulness is really an essential ingredient that we can't leave out of this equation.
Yeah. And there are, by the way, organizations that do exactly that, that are
Yeah.
set up to help with teachers. Schools Educating Mindfully is one that comes to mind. And they've been
Yeah.
going for
And
some
our
years.
mindfulness directors, that's kind of part of their, we don't say go exactly here, but we say, here's the direction we'd love for you to point in, or we want to help you. And whole school, hence our name, integration of mindfulness, which includes the adults, is part of that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our guest today, Ben Painter. I will have several links again in the description. Ben, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah. Thank you, Ted.
I am so glad you could join us for today's conversation. Just yesterday on TikTok, I watched a video of a flight attendant thanking a teacher she had 30 years before who happened to be on that flight, and the cheers from everyone on that plane as they hugged and tearfully, joyously embraced. Who you are as a teacher makes a difference. Remember, every moment you have a choice, make it the best you can. And I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.